The news now on BBC One with Hugh Edwards.
Tonight at 10, Theresa May strengthens her position in the race to become Conservative leader and Prime Minister. In the first round of voting among Conservative MPs this evening, Mrs May was comfortably ahead of her rivals with the backing of 165 colleagues. The battle for the second place on the ballot is now between Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove, after Stephen Crabb and Liam Fox dropped out, both men offering their support to the Home Secretary.
I won't put my name forward to the next round of voting, but instead I'll be lending my wholehearted support to Theresa May, who is overwhelmingly in the best position to be the next Prime Minister and the leader of the Conservative Party.
I've decided to give my support to Theresa May. I intend to work closely with her to campaign for her, and I'm sure she'll be a very fine Prime Minister of this country.
But tonight, Michael Gove confirmed that he would be staying in the race. There'll be a new round of voting on Thursday. Also in the programme, the Bank of England warns that some of the economic risks from the Leave vote are already materialising. On the eve of the Chilcot report into the Iraq War, we speak to some of the relatives of those who lost their lives. Junior doctors and medical students in England have voted to reject a new employment contract. And the Wales squad has spent the day preparing for that big match against Portugal tomorrow night.
And coming up in Sports Day, the stars of Wimbledon are Venus and her sister Serena. Both cruise through to the last four.
Good evening. Theresa May has strengthened her position in the race to succeed David Cameron as Conservative leader and Prime Minister. In the first round of voting among Conservative MPs this evening, Mrs May was comfortably ahead of her rivals with 165 votes. The battle for the second place on the ballot paper is now between Andrea Leadsom, who took 66, and Michael Gove on 48. Stephen Crabb, who won 34 votes, has withdrawn from the race tonight, and Liam Fox dropped out after coming last with 16 votes. They have both now offered their support to the Home Secretary, Theresa May, as our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, tells us.
The man in the know, the chairman of the Tory MPs committee, what was in the brown envelope in the wood-panelled room.
Stephen Crabb, 34. Dr Liam Fox, 16, Michael Gove, 48, Andrea Leadsom, 66, Theresa May, 165.
It's only the first round, but a desk-thumpingly good result for the Home Secretary and her supporters.
This is the biggest vote that somebody's had since 1995. I think it's clear that is an overwhelming result. We're really pleased with that, and yes, it's a superb result for Theresa May. But as I say, I think it reflects what members of Parliament are thinking about the next leader of our party.
Theresa May, who's been Home Secretary for 6 years, was way out in front with 165 votes. Her nearest rival, Andrea Leadsom, the Eurosceptic Energy Minister, was 99 votes behind on 66. Michael Gove, the Justice Secretary, managed 48. Stephen Crabb, who's been in the Cabinet for just 2 years, received 34. But Liam Fox, the former Defence Secretary, drops out, only mustering 16 votes. So that leaves 4 in the race. And despite his Euroscepticism, Dr Fox announced he's backing Theresa May.
Evening. It is essential that they have an understanding at the top levels of government and of international affairs and how the process in Whitehall operates. And for that reason, I've decided to give my support to Theresa May.
Unless people change the way they vote in order to vote tactically.
And as the results sank in, the Home Secretary's team were still counting more support. In the aftermath of the vote, the numbers were only going one way. Stephen Crabb withdrew and decided this.
It's a really serious moment for our country, and so I've taken the decision that I won't put my name forward to the next round of voting, but instead that I'll be lending my wholehearted support to Theresa May, who is overwhelmingly in the best position to be the next Prime Minister and the leader of the Conservative Party.
But with another secret vote on Thursday, Michael Gove is determined to hang on.
I believed in Britain leaving the European Union, and I've argued for it for years. Now that it has, I think the country deserves to have a leader who believes in Britain outside the European Union, but one who also has experience at the highest level of government and a vision of how this country can be freer and fairer as well.
And Andrea Leadsom's out-supporting colleagues are far from giving up. She was in second place tonight.
Fantastic result.
And they believe they can use the momentum from the referendum to get her onto the ticket and into number 10.
You cannot stop what the public want. The public want 2 strong women in the final round and then a woman Prime Minister, and I'm absolutely with that.
In just one night, the field of contenders has gone from 5 to 3. Theresa May and her supporters are further in front than they'd ever hoped. But MPs don't make the final decision, nor do we as the general public. It's Tory party members around the country who will pick from the final 2. But it's Theresa May's colleagues who are laughing now, almost jumping for joy. Tonight, at least, they need a lot more than 2 hands to count her support.
Let's go live to Westminster, and Laura's there. All right, Laura, let's ask the blunt question. How confident is she feeling tonight, do you think?
Well, Hugh, I think Theresa May can be confident that she will be on the final ballot, those 2 names that go to Conservative members right around the country. In terms of her support, with Stephen Crabb and Liam Fox coming on board in the wake of the vote, she now has the support of more than half of all Tory MPs. That's more than her camp ever dreamed of. But in terms of the real Westminster race, that's now between Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove. They were both campaigning fiercely on the outside of the referendum. And one minister predicted to me it might get nasty between the 2 of them. The Brexiteers, they said, might end up eating themselves. But in terms of the race, once it gets to Tory members around the country, it's much harder to predict. Broadly speaking, they are quite a Eurosceptic bunch. So Theresa May, who is widely admired and respected by Tory party members, can't be confident of what will happen when the machinations leave here and go right around the country. And by nature, she is a careful and cautious politician. Her team are buoyant tonight. That's absolutely the case. But they will be resisting the temptation to think that this race is anything like a foregone conclusion.
OK, Laura, thanks very much again. Laura Kuenssberg there with the latest at Westminster. Now, the economic outlook following the vote to leave the European Union is challenging, according to Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England. He was speaking as the pound hit a new 31-year low against the dollar. Mr Carney said that some of the economic risks that he'd warned of before the referendum had now started to materialise. And he said people with large debts were particularly vulnerable to any economic downturn. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, has more details.
When zeroing in on the performance of the economy post-Brexit, one address really matters. 1 Threadneedle Street, the City of London, home to the Bank of England. In this period of political and economic uncertainty, Mark Carney sought to reassure. Yes, tough economic times might be ahead and tough decisions for the government, but the bank has a plan.
By promoting monetary and financial stability, the bank can help facilitate these decisions, smooth the necessary economic adjustments, and help UK households and businesses seize new opportunity. We have a clear plan. We're rapidly putting its main elements in place, and it's working.
So what does the governor believe the post-Brexit economy looks like? He warned today about the high levels of debt carried by some consumers, saying that everyone should be prudent. He said there were concerns about the property market, both commercial, where prices might fall, and domestic. To help, the governor pushed for up to £150 billion of new lending by banks by relaxing regulations.
The banks and building societies are up and running, they're open. Credit is available for people who want it. We've reinforced that today, and that will help this adjustment without question. It's going to dampen, it's going to cushion, it's going to make it better than it otherwise would be, and that is, so we're in a very different world than we were in 2007-8.
Around the table today, the leaders of some of Britain's biggest banks, meeting the Chancellor, giving more reassurance.
We created a system whereby the next time we had a challenging economic environment, our banks were part of the solution to the problem rather than part of the problem. And so the Bank of England has been able to free up additional lending capacity for the banks.
It's a precarious time, and for house developers here in South London and across the country, the worry is that prices could come under pressure. Any help is gratefully received.
It's really uncharted water, so it's a very difficult one to call. But I think people just need to remain resilient and confident. I think the sun has risen 12 times since the Brexit vote, and it will continue to rise. Let's stay positive and let's keep Britain building.
Others are less confident. Today, two more property investment funds, M&G, Britain's largest, and Aviva, temporarily closed their doors after too many investors tried to withdraw their money. Stocks in property firms also declined as fears spread that prices could fall.
There has been a subtle change of tone from the Governor of the Bank of England. Before the referendum, you would have struggled to hear the word positive fall from Mark Carney's lips, but he did use the word today, at least about some of the economic indicators post the big vote. Now, why is that? Because Mark Carney says he wants to offer reassurance. Reassurance to consumers, reassurance to businesses, the two big drivers of the UK economy.
Uncertainty still stalks the city. The pound is falling again, and the governor said challenging times lay ahead. Mr. Carney is treading a fine line, trying to reassure in a fast-moving, uncertain economic world. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
At the European Parliament, there were harsh words today for Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage following their prominent parts in the Leave campaign. The European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, accused them of quitting as soon as things got difficult. But Mr Farage said the referendum had brought chaos and confusion to UK politics, and that, he said, was a good thing. Let's join our correspondent Damien Grammaticus in Strasbourg tonight.
Hugh, yes, here in Europe, politicians are facing up to some pretty tough questions now. In Strasbourg today, there were difficult issues for the EU, how it can prevent other countries following the UK, and even harsher criticism, the tone set by Jean-Claude Juncker for the leaders of the Leave campaign.
Johnson, Farage.
The architects of Brexit savaged today. Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage accused of creating a crisis, then fleeing responsibility for it.
They're not patriots. Patriots don't resign when things get difficult. They stay.
The Brexiteers, they remind me rats fleeing a sinking ship. Cameron resigned. Johnson abandoned, and Farage wants more time for himself and his family to spend his European salary, apparently.
So no Nigel Farage to be seen, just his UKIP colleagues. We found him, though, outside the chamber.
What they were saying is Brexit has brought chaos and confusion to the UK politics and UK economy.
Oh, it's brought chaos and confusion to UK politics, and a very good thing too, because it needed shaking up, because what we've had are two so-called major parties who virtually merged on the big issues for the last 30 years. They've now been soundly beaten in a referendum, and yeah, we're seeing seismic shocks from that. That's not a bad thing, that's a good thing.
As for being a rat leaving a sinking ship, he said that jibe was a sign Europe's politicians are worried the UK will not be the last country to leave the EU. And many are worried.
If we don't change things, if we don't change this European Union into one for the citizens, it's going to fail. And we'll all be jointly responsible for that.
And if the next British Prime Minister thinks they'll get a special deal from Europe, the EU's basic position was repeated time and time again.
If you want access to the single market, you must respect the four freedoms, including freedom of movement. That's it.
Viewed from here in Europe, the referendum has brought a crisis of politics to the UK and a crisis of confidence for the EU. If it doesn't reform, they say, it will face referendums in more countries and possible fracture and failure. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Strasbourg.
The man who has carried out the inquiry into Britain's role in the Iraq conflict says the main lesson is that careful analysis is needed before military intervention can be sanctioned. Sir John Chilcot will deliver his long-awaited report tomorrow, more than 7 years after his official inquiry began. And it looks at the decision-making process before the invasion and during the conflict, and at the lessons to be learned from what happened. Tens of thousands of people died during the conflict and in the chaos that followed, as our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports.
In 2003, a coalition of American, British and other forces invaded Iraq. They claimed the country's leader, Saddam Hussein, was a threat to the West.
He has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes.
Within weeks, Iraq's army was defeated. Saddam was ousted, and later that year, captured.
The tyrant has fallen, and Iraq is free.
But it turned out that Iraq had no usable weapons of mass destruction, and in the civil war and insurgency that followed, hundreds of thousands died. 179 British servicemen and women lost their lives, more than 3,000 were wounded. So in 2009, Sir John Chilcot was asked to establish what happened, how decisions were made, and what lessons could be learned. Tonight, his judgment is clear. Governments should think harder before they go to war.
The main expectation that I have is that it will not be possible in future to engage in a military or indeed a diplomatic endeavour on such a scale and of such gravity without really careful challenge, analysis and assessment and collective political judgment being applied to it.
His inquiry focused on some key questions. Was the war legal without an explicit United Nations mandate? Was intelligence manipulated to make the case for war? Did the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, decide to go to war earlier than was admitted? And did UK forces have the right equipment for the job? For almost 7 years, the inquiry has waded through thousands of documents and heard months of oral evidence. There have been rows over what could be published and the process of giving people the right to reply. Tomorrow, here, the report will finally be published. But for the families of those who died or were wounded, the delay has been hugely frustrating. Lance Corporal Ben Hyde died in Iraq in 2003. Today his father, John, like many others who lost loved ones, travelled to London ahead of the report's publication. And he was realistic about what it may say.
It might highlight a lot of things that happened that shouldn't have happened and things that should have happened that didn't. But I don't think anything is going to come out of it that could lead to a prosecution.
For some, this report will never justify a war they opposed, but it may provide some answers about what went wrong and what should happen in the future. James Landau, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, many of the critics of the invasion of Iraq are hoping that the report will highlight failures in the military campaign and apportion blame in a very clear way. As we've heard there, 179 British servicemen and women died while serving in Iraq, and many of their families have campaigned to bring forward the release of tomorrow's report. Our special correspondent, Fergal Keane, has been talking to some of them.
When it takes away a son, daughter, father, brother, the war is never over. Sergeant John Jones was killed by a roadside bomb in Basra in 2005.
It's fifth, 5 across and 5 down.
John Jones' mother Carol campaigned to bring this memorial wall from Basra to Britain. She's experienced years of pain waiting for the Chilcot report.
I really do hope that we can close the book on the 6th of July, because it's not fair to ask 179 families, you imagine how many people that is, to ask us to wait 6 years. There's got to be something that they've got to tell us.
Carol Jones wants answers about the troops' equipment, like the snatched Land Rover her son died in, too lightly armoured, veterans say. And she questions the reason for going to war.
There was no weapons of mass destruction. It was just a total waste of lives. But that's a mother's opinion. A soldier would say something different. They wouldn't say it was a waste of time. They would get angry with me if I said that.
Mark Dryden was John's close friend. Here they are in a photograph taken 2 days before the attack. Mark was sitting beside John when he was killed. He lost his arm.
It was smoke, blood, just burning smell. I'll never forget it. Burning a rubber, steering wheels all blown away, and pain.
Mark now works as a diving instructor in Dubai, back in the Middle East after he struggled to settle in Britain. He's haunted by that day in Basra.
And I made that decision to drive up that road.
That's a terrible burden to carry with you.
Carried it for the last 11 years.
There are people who should feel guilty about what happened in Iraq, but you're not one of them, surely.
It was my responsibility. I was driving a Land Rover. I made that decision. Like I say, I let him down that day. Soldier's greatest fear is letting his mates down. It's not down on the front line.
When are you going to forgive yourself?
Probably the day I die.
Troops who'd been welcomed as liberators became targets as Iraq unravelled. The poor planning for the aftermath of invasion helped unleash catastrophe.
They expected us to go from war fighting straight into peacekeeping mode straight away. And it's impossible, because 1 minute you try to kill somebody, the next minute you try to protect them.
The Ministry of Defence has named a British soldier killed by a roadside bomb in southern Iraq on Friday. He was Corporal
John Rigby was killed on his 24th birthday. His twin brother, also a soldier, was holding his hand when he died in hospital in Basra. His parents want Chilcot to confront the responsibility of politicians.
I'm hoping that people who I think should be held to account for what I can only call mistakes are held to account for those mistakes. My granddad fought in a war where it was said that the troops were lions led by donkeys. The lads in Basra were called the Lions of Basra. But the donkeys in this instance, I would say, were the politicians that sent them there in the first place.
The news from Iraq, sectarian war, civilian deaths, the rise and spread of extremism, is a constant challenge to the Rigbys, who'd initially accepted the government's justification for going to war.
It's always there, isn't it, on the television, in the newspaper. It's still a reminder of John and what happened.
The Rigbys walked and fished here with their son, and it is where they feel closest to him.
I'm at the edge of the wood and I can, if I say I feel him, do you understand? You get some idea of what I mean. I think he's around, sort of, you know, looking at me through the trees. And it's good.
At the National Memorial Arboretum in the Midlands, willows have been planted in memory of the dead. Carol Jones comes here to remember her son John.
He was my flesh and blood, my son, a part of me. That's what I miss.
Chilcot cannot heal wounds, but he can provide answers. Fergal Keane, BBC News.
Fergal Keane there, ending his report on one mother's long wait for the Chilcot report, the report that will be published tomorrow. Let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories. Thousands of teachers in England have been on strike today in protest at what their union says is a reduction in funding. A third of all schools were affected, with many closed or partially closed. The government says the 24-hour strike will damage pupils' education and, it says, the reputation of teachers. Southern Rail is to cut around 340 train services a day as a temporary measure following weeks of delays and cancellations caused by industrial action and a shortage of staff. The company, which operates trains in parts of London, Kent, Hampshire and Buckinghamshire, has been in dispute with the RMT union over the role of conductors. The cockpit voice recorder of the Egypt airplane, which crashed in May, indicates that there was an attempt to put out a fire on board before the jet plunged into the Mediterranean. All 66 people on board were killed. Now, junior doctors and medical students in England have rejected proposals to end their dispute over pay and conditions. The government and the doctors' union, the BMA, had reached agreement on a new contract, but nearly 60% of doctors who took part in a ballot were opposed. The junior doctors' leader at the BMA has resigned. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has more details.
With marches at Westminster, pickets outside hospitals and junior doctors in England for the first time boycotting emergency care, it's been a prolonged and bitter dispute. In May, the doctors' union, the BMA, agreed a contract deal with the government, but now members have rejected it. After the result showing 58% voting no, I caught up with 2 junior doctors, one who voted in favour and one against the proposed contract.
I voted yes because I was concerned that should we vote no, some of the gains we'd made by asking the government to listen to our concerns, all the protests, the industrial action, would be lost.
I voted to reject the contract. Despite the fact that significant gains were made, there were still a lot of issues that hadn't been fully addressed. I still felt that the contract was discriminatory. It still didn't really address the issues of recruitment and retention, which right now are more important than ever.
The contract agreement involved a basic pay rise of between 10 and 11%, with a reduction in unsocial hours pay and an allowance after working more than 6 weekends per year. Equal opportunities concerns, mainly affecting women, were addressed.
And they negotiated a deal which they said was a good deal, and that's now been rejected by the BMA membership, and it makes it very difficult for us as a government to know who we should negotiate with, or indeed whether there's any point in having these negotiations.
So the question is, what happens now? Junior doctors' leaders meet tomorrow to decide their next move. Further strikes seem unlikely at this stage, though legal action against the government may continue. Ministers will have to decide what to do about the contract.
The BMA is now in some difficulty. The chair of their main junior doctors committee has resigned. I would expect the government reluctantly to impose the contract which the junior doctors rejected today.
It's hardly going to be a calm few months for the NHS, with confusion over the junior doctors' contract adding to the uncertainty over the economy and what that might mean for public finances, and uncertainty over political leadership ahead of the arrival of a new Prime Minister. The vote indicates a degree of discontent about the state of the NHS in England amongst junior doctors. The mood of the protesters seen during the dispute seems unlikely to fade. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The FBI has announced it will not recommend criminal charges against Hillary Clinton for using a private email account to receive secret government material while she was Secretary of State. The FBI Director, James Comey, said that Mrs. Clinton had been extremely careless and that she should have known that using a private email server was inappropriate. Our correspondent, Nick Bryant, has the story.
Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton on an airborne mission to prevent Donald Trump from ever boarding this plane. The president is using the full might of his office to help her become his successor. But it was another branch of the federal government, the FBI, that threatened to destroy her candidacy. So today's statement from the FBI director was one of the most eagerly awaited in years, and made all the more dramatic because so much of it sounded like the prosecution's opening statement in a criminal trial. Hillary Clinton and her staff had been extremely careless, he said, in the handling of very sensitive information. The FBI discovered more than 100 classified emails on the servers, something she's always claimed wasn't the case. But on the central question of whether she should face criminal charges, he said this.
Although there is evidence of potential violations of the statutes regarding the handling of classified information, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case.
As they journeyed to their first joint campaign appearance, an event already in the diary. The White House says they didn't discuss the investigation and no mention was made of it on stage. Instead, she turned her fire on Donald Trump.
Can you imagine him sitting in the Oval Office the next time America faces a crisis? The world hangs on every word our president says. And Donald Trump is simply unqualified and temperamentally unfit to be our president and commander-in-chief.
Then from her former boss, the most glowing of job references.
There has never been any man or woman more qualified for this office than Hillary Clinton. Ever.
President Obama has basically become Hillary Clinton's character witness in chief, but doubts remain about her trustworthiness and judgment. Within minutes, Donald Trump had taken to Twitter, expressing disbelief at the FBI's recommendation. FBI director said crooked Hillary compromised our national security. No charges, wow, rigged system. The legal cloud that's been hanging over a campaign may have been lifted. but this email storm still engulfs her candidacy. Nick Bryant, BBC News, North Carolina.
Some tennis news, and both Serena and Venus Williams are through to the Wimbledon semi-finals. Venus Williams beat Kazakhstan Yaroslava Shvedova in straight sets. It'll be her first Wimbledon semi-final since 2009. And at 36, she's the oldest player to reach the semis in more than 20 years. Well, now, the Wales football squad has spent the day preparing for the big match against Portugal in the semi-finals of Euro 2016 tomorrow night. The match in Lyon will be the first ever major championship semi-final for Wales, and they're also the first national team from the UK to make it to this stage of a major championship for 20 years. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports now from Lyon.
It's a journey they simply don't want to end. Wales fans setting off from Cardiff to Lyon this evening for a match that's not to be missed. Travelling through the night, a small price to pay for the biggest game in their team's history. The semi-final of Euro 2016, with support from all quarters.
Any message for the Wales football team tomorrow night, sir?
Well, huge good luck is all I can say.
The odds, in a way, scarcely believable, finishing top of their group. They're unforgettable.
In big tournaments, they know what this is all about. This is our first one. We'll be the underdogs. No problem.
As they looked round the stadium here in Lyon this afternoon, Wales could reflect on just how far they've come in a very short time. The team's remarkable revival began under former manager Gary Speed, and after his tragic death in 2011 was continued by his friend Coleman. Wales climbing from a lowly 117th in the world rankings to the top 10 in less than 5 years.
These Welsh players have already made history, but win here tomorrow night and they'll achieve what no other British team has managed since 1966, reaching a major tournament final. So what's the secret behind their remarkable success?
Tonight, the man who runs Welsh football told me that this was about way more than just a skillful and spirited squad.
Chris Coleman and, of course, all of his backroom staff need to be thanked too. Then, of course, there's the rest of the FAW staff. We've been working on this for 12 months solid to make this right, and we really tried to do our best. I went to the board, I got them to spend the participation money to give the boys the very best opportunity to success on the field of play. They paid us back in their droves. And then the fans have been brilliant. This is real history in the making.
The match brings together a mouth-watering clash of two footballing superstars. Wales' Gareth Bale replaced his Real Madrid teammate Cristiano Ronaldo as the world's most expensive player. But the Portuguese captain is at the top of sport's rich list, and his goals have established him as the best European of his generation. Portugal are yet to win a game here in 90 minutes, and some believe all the momentum is with Wales.
The story's not ended. The story's not ended. They could beat Portugal. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think the manager's done a fantastic job, I really do.
Now, Jupiter is the biggest planet in our solar system, the oldest, and yet we still know surprisingly little about it and how it was formed. The NASA probe Juno has just gone into orbit and hopes to uncover answers to some of Jupiter's mysteries, including the influence it had on the formation of planet Earth and other planets too. Our science correspondent, Rebecca Morell, reports from Mission Control in California.
A tense wait at Mission Control to learn the fate of NASA's billion-dollar spacecraft. Then, a signal.
It's pure, the mood is pure elation here after more than a decade's worth of work and a 2.8 billion kilometre journey through space. Juno is the closest we've ever been to Jupiter.
So we prepared a contingency communications procedure, and guess what? We don't need that anymore.
And this is its new home. Over the next 20 months, Juno will complete 37 orbits. Skirting just over the top of Jupiter's thick atmosphere, it will give us our best ever views of the giant red spot, the colossal storm that's raged for hundreds of years. And for the first time, peer through the clouds to finally reveal what lies beneath. Its raft of scientific instruments could even shed light on the origins of the solar system. Born from a cloud of gas and dust, Jupiter's remained largely unchanged. It's the ultimate time capsule.
Jupiter is so massive that 1,000 Earths could sit inside it.
And as it spins every 10 hours, it takes everything with it. It's an incredible environment, huge storms on its surface, and Juno's going to unlock its secrets.
But this mission won't be easy. Jupiter's intense magnetic field generates bands of deadly radiation. As the spacecraft flies through them, it will experience the equivalent of 100 million dental X-rays. Jupiter's just lit up with a spectacular aurora. Next month, the data begins to pour back, finally illuminating this vast, mysterious planet. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News, Pasadena.
And that's it from us. There's more on the Conservative leadership race on Newsnight on BBC Two, and all the day's news, of course, on the BBC News channel. But here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.